Yeah, they don't.
Slipped on the going across that piece over here, the Manchester bit. And
can I welcome Rosemary back?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I've missed Rosemary for the last 2 weeks.
We haven't.
No, nobody else did, Rosemary, but I did. I missed you hugely.
But you won't miss next time.
No. I'd like to Glen to know that I'm a complete heretic when it comes to roading and transport.
We know that.
Yes.
Got that impression.
Yeah, and I spent a portion of my life fighting transportation engineers, and I found them a very worthy cause. And I joined the city council because we were trying to stop roading engineers putting a motorway through our suburb, and you just go away and stop looking at them and they carry on like bloody rust. And I think that the good thing about engineering is that there are more and more women there now. And
that's a problem.
It's a
Good on you, John.
Yes.
Stand up.
Somebody has to stand up for male chauvinist pigs. Good to see you back, John. But I think we're now starting to talk about engineering in a lot more holistic way, which is a lot healthier. And I've been really annoyed during this election campaign at the focus on cycleways and people rubbishing them. And I have to say, in the last year I've hopped back on a push bike, and the cycleways
Let's say e-bike.
E-bike.
It's a start.
It's and the person over there who's rubbishing me rides an e-bike as well. So
I am not a fair weather e-bike.
No, that's true. That's true. He rubbishes me because for the last 2 months I felt it was a bit cold on the bike. But anyway.
It was cold.
So it was cold, yes, exactly. Anyway, this isn't what you came to talk about. And they're going to rubbish me all night, so I'm going to sit down, but welcome Glen.
Thank you very much, Gary. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Kia ora. See you all. Māori Language Week. I'm not going to go through mihi and all that. I struggle enough at the best of times, actually, and I did third form Māori. But what I am going to do is talk about hopefully a topic dear to your heart, which is transport. I certainly, when I was at university, the first lesson I used to teach my students was everyone's a traffic engineer. You know, if you say, oh, what do you do? Oh, I'm doing traffic. Ah, there's a bloody road down my way. Did you have anything to do with that project? Whatever. So, yes, everyone has an opinion. Whether it's a right opinion, well, we'll see. What I want to do today, firstly, I'm just setting the scene a little bit. I thought I'd put them on you.
Just turned over there.
A little bit about me, but then I want to start with the big picture stuff, and I'll start with a bit of a case study, actually a bit dear to Gary's heart, actually, but it's Transport 101. I'm going to do a bit of a brain dump, really, just sort of go through some of the different travel modes and some of the thoughts that I thought might be useful to sort of think about. And finish with particularly thinking about how we should perhaps be prioritising spending, or our elected members, or our future elected members should be prioritising spending. And that should hopefully leave us time for a few questions and discussions at the end. I should point out, and perhaps we can answer questions about why on earth they built this, for example. I should point out I've got a very important meeting after this to go to, otherwise known as a pub quiz team. Excuse me if I escape. Okay, so a little bit about me. I currently work at ViaStrada, which is a little traffic engineering company. I don't even think we're 10 people. I've been there for about 3 years now. I'm one of the directors there. I got asked to come and join them after spending about a dozen years with the University of Canterbury. I used to teach transportation there in the engineering department, although it was interesting the wide range of people you actually ended up teaching in transportation, especially in the postgraduate program. I just stopped getting surprised at the background that we have in the transport discipline there, which is really cool. It's good to have that breadth of different backgrounds coming through. And before that, I slogged away as a consultant for Opus International as well. I had a couple of big companies, and now I'm quite enjoying life in a very small company actually as well. One thing I find is that with the university, it was a really good opportunity to sort of get around the world. You tend to have these nice travel budgets. You can go and see conferences and study tours and so forth. And so it was really good to sort of broaden my mind about what's happening elsewhere around the world, what is going on in transport. Excuse me, North America, Europe, so forth like that. It was interesting over time. I sort of found that I was less and less looking at the question of what's the transport doing, but more about what's the city doing. It was often quite interesting to look and understand how does the city tick, because that's very much intricately linked with the transport, I often found as well. Back to ViaStrada consultants, more about, I tend to find I'm going around the country, so I'm sort of getting to see what's happening around there. In fact, I do far more out of Christchurch than I do in Christchurch, mostly just a few safety audits here. So it's quite interesting to compare what's happening in other cities and perhaps how we could apply some of that or not to Christchurch as well. In case anyone thinks I've got any biases, I thought I should declare a few of my affiliations or memberships as well. So I'm a paid up member of Living Streets, which is a pedestrian group, CAN, Cycling Action Network, Spokes Canterbury, the cycling group, the New Zealand AA, and I'm also on the Environment Canterbury PT Advisory Group. So I think I've spread myself sufficiently that I can perhaps cover the bases there. And not that the screen shows it very well, it looks like I'm in the dark at the bottom there, but I do go and pester the council every now and then as well, make representations there on various matters. Okay, the thing I find about transport in New Zealand is quite interesting, especially when you're looking at election time, is that it is a very topical issue in local government. Okay, we're already seeing conversations here, and likewise around the country. Auckland's always a big issue there and so forth. But the really interesting thing is that most of the key policy decisions are not made locally. They're made central government, is where they decide, okay, what direction we're going to take, how much money you get to spend and so forth. And yet, interestingly, when you have a central government election, like we will next year, it barely is on the radar. It's usually not the main thing. It's housing and health and all those other things like that. So that's a bit weird. But what it means still is that we can still do some influencing. I think as a local area, our councils, our elected members and other key players, we should be certainly trying to influence the ones at central government. The ministers directly, the ministry, the transport agency, they're probably the key ones that we need to keep talking to them. If we think, hey, we're not happy about this, or what you're doing, or what's happening to Christchurch because of it, we can keep nudging, and they do pay some attention at least. Now, I tried to work out a bit of an ecosystem of just who's involved in transport, because this is the thing that I know confuses a lot of people when they say things like, Christchurch City Council, fix those buses. And I'm like, well, they're not our buses actually, they're someone else's. So this is just trying to understand who's potentially involved in transport around Christchurch. Obviously the City Council in the middle, and they do have a lot of fingers and pies, but often they have to be talking to other organisations as well. So we do have Environment Canterbury, particularly on the transport, public transport side of things. The Transport Agency, who we've got to be nice to because they give us funding subsidy. And they look after the state highways that are here in the city as well. A little bit of linkage with the Ministry of Transport, so especially when they're doing things like their government policy statement on transport, making sure that aligns as well. Obviously, we've just had a few years of SERA/CCDU/Otakoro.
Slash the lot.
Slash the lot, yeah, soon to be none, hopefully. But that's clearly had a lot to do with the central city. And again, I know City Council gets in the neck sometimes. They go, yeah, that wasn't actually our project, so this is the problem. And we have to talk to our neighbours, Selwyn and Waimak. Kia rail off to the side. I will talk a little bit about rail later on, but I guess at the moment we don't have a big conversation with them on the passenger side, a little bit more on the freight side as it comes through. And I'm probably missing someone. I'm certainly missing the users and the private organisers of transport and so forth, bus companies and freight companies and so forth. But that alone, you can see there's a lot of parties, and anyone who gets into this space has to understand that ecosystem a little bit in terms of what they can and what they can't do with their mandate.
Very good diagram.
Yeah, thank you. It took at least an hour last night, so. Let's start with big picture stuff here. And the biggest picture I think is thinking global. Gary did ask me, he said, think global, and I was like, okay, well, let's start with the globe. Obviously there's a lot of interest and discussion these days about climate change. We've declared a climate change emergency here. And when you look at the greenhouse gas emissions by sector in Christchurch, it really stands out the impact of transport. There we are, 53%, more than half is transport. Okay? And if we look at what the international panel's targets are by 2030, we're supposed to have dropped it by 45%. And that was set a few years ago. Meanwhile, we've continued to go up. So it now works out as much more than 4%, almost 5% per annum reduction we'd have to have year on year to achieve that, which is actually quite a drop when we're still sort of continuing to creep up in terms of our motor traffic usage, for example. Okay, we really have to think hard and quick about how we're going to tackle that problem if we're going to meet those requirements on the transport front. Okay, so I guess this is Transport 101. I sort of want to set the scene here, and this is something I actually first presented about 8 years ago, and it's funny how it's now very relevant actually, but I presented the concept of the Christchurch Northern Roading Axis, which a lot of you would have been very familiar with. And the key challenge is we've got people who live somewhere off to the north, say Reniora, but they work in town, say Christchurch, and they'll typically drive. Likewise, we've got freight often coming in from the north, and it's got to go to industry or ports and so forth, so they're all wanting to come in from the north. And the problem is, of course, it's a great schmozzle in the middle there, especially every morning and every evening, trying to get through there. Okay, and that's been the way for a few decades. Okay, and if anything, it's just got worse, probably exacerbated, especially by the earthquakes. So there was the old way of doing it was you looked at these things and you said, okay, this is what's currently there, and you do some modelling. And that's probably the thing that Gary would have really hated at the time. And then someone would have said, okay, what's it going to be in the future? And he said, oh, it's going to be really bad in some places. Look at that. Oh, red. Oh, you know, it's going to have real problems here fitting all those cars in that space. And so you'd work out, aha, we need some additional road capacity. We need some additional road capacity. Okay. And so that was really the very traditional way we did it for decades, was predict and provide. This growth is going to happen, and therefore we're going to need this growth. Interestingly, we've just gone through a period of about 10 or 15 years where traffic growth is pretty much flat-lined. It's only just started creeping up a couple of years now, but we went through the 2000s with virtually no change at all. Okay, so there was a roading study done almost 2 decades ago, actually, the Christchurch Northern Roading Option Study. I thought it was interesting to read the objective of the study. Okay, my emphasis to identify improvements to the road network required to meet the transportation needs over the next 20 years. Okay, so kind of sounds like a predetermined solution to me. And to be honest, that was the way it was often done around 2000s and before that as well. So someone came along and said, all right, we've come up with a plan. You may not be able to see all that, but a lot of it probably looks quite familiar to some of the stuff that is happening or has happened recently. So yes, we're building that. We're widening that, and we're widening that. We're not building that. I don't think we're building that. Interesting, this is proposed to be a 2-lane road, actually, on this 2002 report. Well, we've got ourselves a 4-lane road, apparently. But, you know, that was the kind of thing that we typically did, was, okay, there's our roading solution, there's the improvements to meet our transportation needs. And it's often been this, you know, saga that we hear all the time about, well, we're just going to widen and widen because that'll get us out of congestion. Here's Auckland, as you can see, or maybe you can't in the dark, but they're trying to do a bit more widening up there. Last time I was up there, they're adding a few more lanes off to the side, and a few more lanes, another interchange and so forth. Meanwhile, next to it, you've got this brilliant thing called the Northern Busway. It's been there for about 10-15 years now. My sister lives north in Auckland, she lives in Whangaparoa, so if I go up to her, I just hop on a bus, and it's brilliant. You just zoom up there, you get past the stationary car park there, and it is chocker. I mean, they show single buses there, but they're all double-deckers now because there are just so many people using that busway there. It is a brilliant invention. No one thought it was going to work at the time it was built 15 odd years ago, but it's just going gangbusters, and now they're going to extend it a bit further.
And more park and ride needed.
Yep, yeah, and they're going to do that and improve the stations and links and just keep going from there. What I like about this photo is the fact that it looks like lots of cars, heaps of cars, and yet there's probably more people in those 2 buses than in all those cars that you can see in that picture there. Okay, and that's just the power of it. And I do like this statement that heard a few years ago there. That, you know, trying to solve traffic congestion by building more roads is like saying, oh, okay, getting a bit fat, I know, I'll just get the bigger trousers instead. Okay, and to be honest, both have health benefits. If you do the right thing, you get health benefits from obviously getting rid of your obesity or your big roads as well. So this is a problem with predict and provide. We're starting to see a lot more enlightened approach. We are starting to see people go, okay, well if that doesn't work, maybe what we should do is get some better bus options, for example, or rail or things, so that way people can use those modes to come in from the north. Okay? Perhaps we can get some of that freight on the trucks, we can chuck it on a train, we can bring that in as well, or by boat and so forth. So that's one way. We're starting to see a bit more of a multimodal approach and recognising that there are a few other tools in our toolkit. Okay? Another way is thinking, well, it's not just a problem with the people up the top there. Often the challenges are the ones down here, they're also driving in, and so they're helping to contribute to that schmozzle there close up. And they're quite close to town, they're quite close to their work or school or whatever. So actually if we can get some of them biking or walking, that actually frees up some of the other ones as well. Okay, so that's another way of tackling it, not just the long-term trips but also the short-term trips as well. And you know, if you do live further away, that doesn't mean you can't bike either. Gary's just been extolling the virtues of his wonderful e-bike, and that's certainly one solution. But you know, we also have bike racks on buses. We've had them for over a decade here, so you can mix and match. You can say, oh, I can't be bothered biking all that way, but I could put the bike on the bus and go half the way and do the last mile on my bike. So, and the other one, of course, is thinking about, well, who's on those cars as well, and whether we've got a lot of single occupant vehicles, and if we can get a few more friends to join them as well, then that's a simple way of also managing to free up our space as well, a bit more carpooling.
Scooters.
And sorry?
Scooters.
Scooters, yeah, well, for the short one, so we could have a little person on a scooter here, and that also captures that space there. Yep. Especially with the apps these days on the phone, so it's a lot easier to be able to talk to people and say, hey, I've got a car, you need a ride, and we can make it happen. Okay, another thing we can do is demand management. Okay, can we look at the pricing and say, actually, you're getting off lightly, and perhaps we need to chuck in some tolls, or bump up the parking charges, or introduce parking charges, or bump up the fuel taxes. So there's all sorts of things where people might go, this is costing a bit more than it used to, maybe there's a cheaper option. In fact, the cheaper options are already there, but sometimes you need to force the issue. Or do we change the way that we do travel? Sometimes we don't travel at all. Every second Wednesday I just work at home. I don't bother coming in, which is great if it's a horrible day outside. Because, you know, I have a laptop, I can do all the same stuff at home. So, you know, telecommuting's one thing. Maybe you can get a bit smart about combining your trips, or not going at the peak. If you've got a job that you can say, you know what, I'm going to go in a bit early or go in a bit late and beat the rush as well. So there's all sorts of things we can do to sort of change those pinch points. But probably the other one we forget about a little bit is that we can actually change the activities as well and where they are. Okay, so that house in Rangiora, well, perhaps a better place is not to be living out in Rangiora and working all the way in town, but actually living closer to town in the first place. So you've now got better options, you've got shorter trips, a trip maybe you can bike instead, for example, and maybe thinking about the way that we can say actually work and play and living can be in the same place or the same area, and get more people in the same spaces rather than spreading out right across the Canterbury hinterland as well. So there's a lot we could do that. It's often a long-term game, although I guess we've had a bit of an opportunity post-quake to do some of that a bit faster than normal. We can do the same with industry as well. We can say, well, hang on, why is the freight company over there but the port's all the way over there, for example, and try and get them together as well. We're starting to see inland ports, so Rolleston's done really well putting a couple of inland ports there so the rail can go to them. The freight can go to them and then they can rail it to the port, and you don't have to have all these trucks lumbering through the middle of Christchurch, for example. So it's just a matter of thinking about whether you can change the existing defaults. Okay, so yeah, there's the inland ports there. Boom. Okay, so that's just setting the scene. That's the kind of solutions that I think we need to think a lot more about in terms of what are traditional or non-traditional ways that we can tackle some of the problems going through. Okay, so now I just want to do a bit of a brain dump of a few different modes and some of the issues that I've thought about or I want to address. Okay, but before we do that, let's come back to land use, because before you even think about transport, I still maintain your best solution is land use. These are my kids actually when I took them over to Europe a few years ago, wandering around Copenhagen, lovely place. And the key thing you find there is a lot of this mixed use. You don't have to travel far, that's why there is a lot of biking and walking. So in the same place, it can be where you live, and then perhaps where you work, and then perhaps where you play, you have a drink and so forth, all in the same space, if not the same building, certainly in the same neighbourhood. Right? And we still have a challenge of often wanting to live over there and work over there, and the shops are over there. And we shouldn't have to do that if we get our land use right. We should be able to make it a lot more sensible. So that's number one, and it's a bit of a long-term game sometimes, but it's the one that we should try and get right, rather than trying to use transport to fix up the problems later. Okay, let's start, work our way up. Walking, most important one I would say. I think what we're finding is that people do like traffic-free or traffic-calmed areas. And we're seeing some really fantastic spots in town now. You know, the promenade there, the terraces, some of the new laneways. I think the laneways are fantastic as a way of providing that extra permeability that you didn't have with the streets. You've now got a few extra shortcuts to go through and all sorts of fun things you can discover.
You wouldn't want to drive there. Everybody was pissed when I went down there.
That's the problem I find is there's still cars trying to park in there. They're getting a bit brave, so we may have to push back on that. But you know, it's an important thing to bear in mind. Why do people like walking? Why do they like certain spaces for walking? It's usually because of the absence of traffic, or traffic that's at least safe and crawling along slowly. But we do have a problem still. We do have a safety problem here. Only the other day we had a pedestrian die on Ferry Road. Okay, we do have a Christchurch problem of having quite a bad record for pedestrians killing and injuring. So we have to sort that out. A key is thinking about safe routes to our main destinations, particularly things like schools and shops and workplaces as well for that matter. And there's a number of tools. I'm going to come back to lower speeds later on, but it's a pretty important one. Crossing opportunities, good crossing opportunities. Okay, making sure the pathways work as well. They've got good capacity and smooth, not going to trip someone up. And we do need to compare consider the impaired users as well. I was doing a safety audit out at the new crossing at QE2 Drive. So we've got the two new schools there, Avonside and Shirley Boys have relocated there. So they've gone and put this new signalised crossing there at the roundabout. And it worked pretty well actually. We didn't find too many concerns. We thought they'd set it up really well, and I was really pleased. One morning we wandered along and looked, and there was a schoolgirl wandering along with a cane as well, and we thought that she knew how to work. Yeah, there's the tactiles, know how to cross. It worked for her. Okay, fantastic facility. And we need more of that. We need to look at the locations where people are thinking, this is really hard to cross this road, this is not fun. And often it's as simple as even a median island, just to make the crossing job a bit simpler. You can do it in two halves. Those things as well, and then looking at the places where actually we need to go further, we need to put in signals or other treatments as well. Okay, cycling. Show of hands, who biked today? Good number here. I know I've got a slightly biased crowd here, but who biked this week? A few more? Who biked this month? Who biked any time in the last 12 months? Good number. All right, flip it around. Who hasn't biked in the last 12 months?
Too ancient.
Okay, I kind of detected it was almost 50-50 though, maybe slightly more biked in the last 12 months than not. It kind of bears out with the data that year on year. So the council does this annual residence survey where they ask you all sorts of things. You know, what do you think of your roads and your rubbish and all that kind of thing. And one of the questions they ask is, have you cycled in the last year, month, week, and so forth? Pretty much consistently from year on year, they're getting this figure here, that about a half of us have cycled sometime in the last year. Okay, it's cycled on road as well, so this isn't just tootling on the mountain bike park. Okay, and about a third, say, have cycled in the last month, and about a quarter or slightly less have cycled in the past week. Okay, so whenever anyone says, but there's only 3% of all trips are cycling, or 7% of commuting, okay, it's this tiny minority we're catering for, you're not. You've got to remember that there's a whole bunch of people already who, maybe only once or twice, are saying, yeah, actually, that'd be a good bike ride there, I'll do that this time around. And maybe, if we make a better environment for cycling, they'll be more inclined to think, I'll do it again, I'll do it some more. Maybe I'll buy that e-bike, maybe I'll see if I do a bit more riding, and sort of switch to the ones who do this more often than the ones who do this, perhaps as well. Okay, so anytime anyone says it's a minority, I say, well actually no, technically it's a majority. It's over 50% there, and it has been. Okay, people might say, oh, it's just a survey. This is a good market research company who does good random sampling, you know, get the right demographics and so forth. And I don't think you get that kind of consistency from having random results. Okay, clearly there are a lot of people who at least do a little bit of biking, think about biking, and perhaps at the moment are going, yeah, no, it's just not for me. That won't work for that trip, or no, I won't let my kids do that trip. Okay, but the potential is there for to turn more of these into people who will bike more frequently if we give them the right environment.
Do we ask the same question about buses?
I'm trying to think if we do in that one there. The numbers are similar though. I do remember seeing up in terms of who's bussed in the last week, month and so forth. And again, you're talking at numbers up here, even though again the percentage of trips, like commuters, is about 6 or 7%. But it's like saying what's the total percentage of gifts that are bought, purchases that are bought that are gifts, Christmas, birthday, things like that. It's probably not much, because most of the stuff we buy is groceries and new TVs and things like that. But we have to buy for someone's birthday and for Christmas and so forth. So it might only be a few percent of our purchases are actually gifts. Okay? But if I said, but how many of you have bought a gift? Probably most of you go, oh yeah, I bought a present for my wife, or things like that. So most of us have done it at some point, and that's the difference between the proportion of total trips versus the proportion of people who've made a trip. Okay, and that's the more important one, I think, to bear in mind. Okay, cycling is not a minority here. The other one, of course, that keeps coming up related to it is that no one is cycling. Okay, and I love CCC Smart View now that it's been out for the last year. So I can say, yeah, except for these many thousands of people who were biking last week. Okay, and this is literally last week. I took this last night, so that is last week. You remember last week? It was pretty crappy weather. Okay, not much fun. Probably Gary wasn't biking because the weather was terrible, right?
How are the counts done?
So they are basically electromagnetic induction loops there. So they detect the metal of the bike going past. They know the signature that it's a bike and not a scooter or a tram or
So
something
you don't
like that.
see it, it's underneath.
They're underneath. If you look carefully, you will see the diamonds. There's a couple of crisscross diamonds.
Okay.
So yeah, it's very clever
is it
technology.
just the line of the diamonds? Because they're always in the middle of the
No,
line.
they're different diamonds. They're the diamonds are the signals, but these are sort of diamonds across you. So like if you go to Antigua Bridge, about 10 metres either side, you will see a couple of diamond shapes cut into the concrete. One's for people going that way, one's for people going that way. So that by the time you get to the display, you go, oh, there's my number. I've just gone up. Okay. So even last week, about 1,000 a day happening there. Over summer, we get 2,000 a day on those ones there. Some of them are only counting one way as well. You've got to be careful that some of the numbers are only on one side of the road, for example. So something like this one here, that's only people coming in on Antigua there. So that's about 350 a day. Okay, double that for both directions. And that one definitely gets higher in the summer as well. That's about 1,000 in the summer as well. Okay, so add up. And of course there's lots of people who don't get captured by these. My bike route completely avoids them. I do this and completely miss the whole lot of them. Okay, but I made a trip. So we have other sources. We're still waiting for the census data to show up one of these days, 2018, because I really want to know what the numbers are, because I just imagine they're going to be jumping up a lot. Excuse me. But we also have the Ministry of Transport does a household travel survey as well. And from that you can get a reasonably good picture of the amount of trips as well. It's a smallish sample, so you've got to be a little careful of scaling that. But generally it's consistently suggested that we make about 50,000 cycle trips a day in Christchurch. Okay, it's a pretty decent number. Okay, as a starting point, and it's probably gone up in the last few years. Because the good thing with these, you go to SmartView, you can actually get the timeline all the way back to when they first started. So you can actually plot, in some cases, nice and steady growth of the numbers.
What's electronically available?
Yes, so you can go to SmartView. In fact, it's a fantastic site for all sorts of other information. You can see them, you click on these, you see the data, you can even download the data as well. So I'm going to have a play soon and actually try and work out a bit of an index of what the growth has been over the last few years. But the rough indication has been that we've had about a 10% per annum growth rate on the cycleways so far. The other one that comes up, and as Gary alluded to, they're controversial. Everyone hates cycleways, and they keep going on about it. Yeah, that's not what the council keeps hearing. Okay, this was some work that a colleague of mine did. He went back and had a look at the submissions. I checked out a couple myself as well. And consistently in the submissions, people are going, actually, we like them. Okay, at least by 2 to 1, 3 to 1, and in some cases by 10 to 1. Okay, far more in favour than against. And I've always found that typically when it comes to submissions, people are more likely to make a submission when they're against something. Okay, if they're happy with it, the status quo, they're like, oh, that's good, they're going to do it. instead of against it, like, oh, over my dead body, all right, I've got to write a submission. So I'm pretty impressed when we get these kind of numbers coming through.
By the same token, they're more likely to write to the paper against something.
Exactly, funny that, isn't it? So you wonder whether they made the submission here as well. But and we've seen this consistently. I've done one of the long-term plan ones there as well, but the previous ones and the previous annual plans and so forth, again, consistently, they've said big picture, we want cycleways, and then on the individual cycleways, again, we've had, yep, it's all good. You know, sometimes there's a few little details that could you tweak this and so forth. I don't think any of these has gone through unchanged. They've all had really good feedback and they've all been tweaked and made better, basically, as a result. You expect that. Some of the ones who, you know, Sedona was at up to 100%. There's those who didn't actually say whether they supported or were against it. Perhaps they sort of weren't sure, or there was bits they liked and there was bits they don't from there as well. But
Spokes is very good at putting submissions with it.
problem is, Spokes only counts as one submission itself, and it certainly tries and encourages other people. I have the Cycling and Christchurch website, so I certainly will make people aware of things as well. But as I say, if people are really against these things, well, here's your opportunity. It's called democracy, folks. So I'm pretty happy that the numbers keep telling us that. Okay, a side note, because it's been topical, I guess, for the last year, is good old scooters. And I think it's important to put the context where people go, they're dangerous and they're a menace and so forth. So, well, hang on, how many people have they killed on scooters? Not many. Okay. Meanwhile, cars continue to kill lots of people in the last year and previous as well. ACC claims keep coming up as well, and I went and checked out the numbers. Now, the average cost of an ACC claim for a scooter is about $360 or something, which is, you know, just going to outpatient. I fell over and bruised myself. So, motor vehicles, it's more like $10,000. Okay, we're talking big dollars. This is why motor vehicle, you pay an extra ACC levy, because the average cost is so much more than most ACC claims as well. Okay, now I get there are concerns, especially in terms of the interactions with pedestrians. Okay, often the interactions are there because they don't want to go on the road. They say, oh, I don't like that traffic. So our challenge is to make a safe space for them, and that's either to make the road safer, think about traffic calming, speed management, so forth, or tackle issues like, can we use things like cycleway spaces as shared spaces? And we've got a little bit of a legislative hurdle on that one at the moment, but I think if we fix that, that'll be good. And to be honest, I just ignore the legislation at the moment and just scooter there anyway. But that's the key, I think, and then hopefully everyone will be happy because everyone will have a space that feels like it works for them. Okay, but yeah, they're not the bad guy. Okay, it's been fantastic to see the growth around the city in them, actually. And speaking of share companies, I'd really love if we could get some bike share as well. These are two Mobikes sitting in our office. We helped Mobike to work on their bid, and they actually were the preferred tenderer, actually. But then decided they had bigger fish to fry somewhere else, and it all kind of fell over, unfortunately. So we're back to, hang on, what happened to our bike share scheme? So I really hope that them or someone else, I don't really care, Lime's got bike shares as well. Someone comes and actually adds to the mix and we have bike share as well as scooter share. I just think it would really provide that missing dimension that, yeah, sometimes scooters don't quite fill the niche, personally, for what we need there. Okay. And if anyone wants a spare Mobike as well, we're not quite sure what to do with these things. So, we were thinking of hanging them up on our ceiling, but don't know. Okay.
Are they e-scooter or e-bikes?
No, everyone asks that, actually, funnily enough. They have that, but that's to power the smarts in terms of there's a smart lock and so forth. And they certainly look snazzy. They're actually quite horrible to ride, to be honest, because they're quite low geared, so you're sitting there like this, especially if you're tall like me. They're not really designed for it, unfortunately, so there are better models around. Okay, PT. I thought I'd just sort of have a crack at a bit of a scorecard here. This is my take on where I see we are at PT at the moment. In terms of coverage, we've actually got quite good coverage. Most of the areas we've got routes to them, and I have found that ECAN's quite quick at sort of popping in trials, trying somewhere new. If a new subdivision pops up, getting something in, and so forth like that. So that's pretty good. Cost, despite people always saying how expensive it is, I keep saying no, it's not. It's actually almost the cheapest one in Australasia. $265, and the fact that once you've paid for 2 trips, you don't have to pay anymore. You can keep using bus all day. You've got your Magic Metro card. It doesn't cost you a thing. That's not to say it couldn't be improved, and I think a real challenge is people with families, and they say, well, hang on, if I've got to pay and my kids have got to pay and so forth, that starts adding up. And so maybe we've got to think about things like one free kid with one adult fare, or at least on weekends. Auckland and Hamilton are doing that now. So just this last weekend, actually, Auckland has introduced, I think it's free fares on the weekends for kids.
16.
Yeah, and so, there's things we can do to just try and nudge the behaviour a little bit further as well. Frequency, if you're on one of the main lines, the blue line and the orbiter and those things, pretty good, 15 minutes, and they're talking about getting them all up to 10-minute frequencies so that you don't even have to think about the timetable, you just go, well, one will turn up soon enough. The problem, of course, is if you're not on one of those services, then you're waiting for half an hour, or maybe on a Sunday you're waiting for an hour, and so forth. And so that is a bit of a problem, that we have a bit of an unequal allocation. It's understandable, because obviously some routes are busier than others, but it means that some people feel like they're getting a bit of a bum deal here. Also related to that is the directness, and I guess with the change in the services, we don't have so many, it used to be everything went straight into town and then you picked another one, went out somewhere, and they've now got a lot more hubs, so like you might go to Riccarton now and then change to another bus to go somewhere else, for example. Good in theory, but clearly it's not working for people, and especially if you can't get those connections to work. Okay, you've got the time penalty, you've got the, I hope that bus is there when I get there, so that's a real challenge, and it's clearly not perfect, it needs further work. And it's related a bit to this last one, which I think is the real crux of the problem here in Christchurch, is that we really have a problem with reliability. Okay, most places the buses just get stuck in the general traffic. Okay, the traffic's crawling along at 5 o'clock, so are you in the bus, unfortunately, and we really don't have a lot of bus priority to try and get around that. And I think that's the key, because if we can get that to work better, you can make that work more efficiently, that you know that you get to the station and yep, there's your next bus, it's bang on time and everything works a lot better. So a lot of potential there. I thought I'd have a crack at trying to work out where the bus priority is. So if you can squint there and see the solid green bits are the bits that, as far as I can tell, we've actually built. And there's a few green dotted bits which we're either building or planning to do. I know I safety audited one of them a while back. And then there's a few red bits where I thought there's a few gaps that personally I would also add to the mix as a starter to try and improve it. The thing I noticed is that actually most of the building we've done has been on state highways. Now, they don't have the same consultation problems, okay? They don't have angry voters, they can just go and do it half the time. And so that's why a lot of them are on state highways in and out of the city there. A lot of them are part-time, okay, and those hours don't always work exactly when perhaps it's the best time to work. And they're certainly not connected. You see there's a bit, and there's a gap, and there's a bit, and there's a gap, and so that's all very fine unless you get stuck in the gap somewhere, okay. This is really an area where I think certainly the City Council could do a lot more. I was just looking this morning and I think there might have been about, I don't know, $4 million or something pitiful planned for the next few years on bus priority lanes here. Okay, and it's ECAN's got to run the buses as it stands at the moment, but Council's got to do their bit by making it easy for the buses to run. Okay, there's nothing ECAN can do about that. So I think we can work better on that.
I'm a bit worried about that bus going around Travis Swamp though.
Oh yeah. Very nice. Okay, that was a dark picture. Now, some of you may have been along to the Chat Club presentations, workshops that we've had earlier in the year, and one of the things we were looking at was different options for passenger transit there. And we were looking at rail options, heavy rail, light rail, also bus rapid transit. This was something we came up to after about 4 workshops, and sort of people had drawn various things on maps. So we came up with the options and then got people to rate them against some outcomes. So you can see the red ones there, basically the heavy rail lines to the north and to the southwest. Okay, and they came up as the most favoured. They seem to tick the most boxes. They have the advantage they're already there, so you're not paying for a lot of infrastructure, a little bit of double tracking in that, but mostly the trains. Light rail is pretty expensive because you've got to build it from brand new. Bus rapid transit is cheaper to build, and certainly if we do get bus rapid transit happening on the motorway, well, it's built already virtually, so that'll be even easier for that one there. But hands down, the heavy rail options came through as being popular. A lot of people keep saying, look, they're already there, just why don't we use them? Okay. So I think that's something we're going to look at. We are now probably the only Australasian city above 250,000 that doesn't have rail. Okay. Canberra and Newcastle have both introduced rail options this year. I was going to check to see...
Light rail?
They're light rail ones in their cases there. I was going to check to see whether Wollongong might be next on the list or things like that. But yeah, we're now being a very obvious exception to the rule, even in not supposedly PT-friendly Australasia.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that rail's the only other option. When we looked at these, we said, it'd be nice ultimately that actually all of these things happen. That you did have various heavy, light, bus rapid transit options coming through, because they serve different needs, and there's probably other ones as well. When we had the conversation at Chat Club recently, someone said, well, hang on, what about out to Woolston and Littleton? And like, yep, oh, there's a train line there as well, so there's options there as well. And I think we've got to, be thinking about bus rapid transit. It can work quite well if you build it well, okay? What we've built in Christchurch so far is what I call bus priority light. We chuck in a few painted lanes, and then they stop when the going gets too tough. You saw the Auckland busway. Now that's some serious money spent there, a couple of $100 million, but they've got a fantastic result for it, okay? I quite like this example. This was 10 years ago. I went and visited Eugene, which is smaller than us in Oregon. So, their neighbours up north in Portland, they've gone and done the fancy light rail and all that there, but they're 2 million people. These guys worked out they can't afford that, so they just said, you know what, we could do a simple bus rapid transit system. And so you sort of got downtown Eugene, University of Oregon, downtown Springfield. So there's a really obvious corridor that they said, let's start with that. The thing is that most of their roads, or a lot of their roads, are like our ones. Okay, when I saw that one on the left, I thought, God, this could be Chilham Street. It was that kind of width. And so what they've done, they had a single lane. And you might think, well, how's that going to work? Buses coming. But what they do is they get to the stations and they widen out. So only every now and then they have to put a bit of width, and that's where you go past each other. And it's sort of a line of sight exercise, because you have that consistency of timing. You see, right, I'm going to go, now you can go, and it all works beautifully like that. They sort of had articulated buses. They look like fancy light rail devices. You just sort of walk straight on and off. The platforms look like light rails, but it's just a bus system.
They're still diesel, yeah?
No, these were electric ones, I believe. Batteries, and they charge at the stations. I think that was how they worked. So it was a simple one that showed that if you're not big enough, you think, oh, we're going to struggle with rail for the budgets. There are other ways and means you can do it. Okay, and I still think it's a really clever, simple solution as well. All right, motor vehicles. Get to them. Some thoughts. What do we think are the biggest problems for motor vehicles in Christchurch? Any ideas?
Drivers.
Drivers, yeah, well, we know there's a few of those.
Schools.
School time, yeah, we know school holidays are good. Yeah.
Physically too large.
Some of them are, yeah.
Particularly on the bike.
The number of four-wheel drives.
It comes with a large one as well, I think. Yeah.
Issue there.
What do we hear in the social media and the news comms always about? Parking, congestion, slow speed limits, blah, blah, blah. You hear these things, don't you? Oh, it's so terrible. Oh, I can't do anything. Oh, it's so confusing to get in town. There's not enough parking, and what parking there is too expensive, blah, blah, blah.
Oh, too big.
Yeah, and I know I've got a bit of a sympathetic audience here, but to be honest, this one I think is the most important one. It's the safety aspect. We keep killing and injuring people. Those things, oh gee, I had to wait an extra 30 seconds. Yeah, that's not your life though. Okay, and I think it's really important. We're starting to appreciate the safety side of things, and put a bit more attention on that. And yeah, some of these other things, we've got to be careful we pander too much to these things, because it doesn't make it any better, as you saw, curing congestion. And it's not like we haven't spent a lot of money already. I went and totted it up. Now the interesting thing is, when you go and read some of the official reports from the Transport Agency, and they say, oh, we spent this much, and I went and looked at the National Land Transport Program and said, yeah, that's the road construction cost, you haven't included the property cost. When you start throwing those in, what was supposedly $900 million is actually $1.2 billion that has been spent, or is currently being spent in this space. So, it's a fair chunky change.
Period?
Well, I guess this was the first one, the Stage 1 Southern Motorway. So when was that? Just after the quakes, or even during the quakes. And of course, some bits like the Northern Arterial now happening at the moment. So I guess ultimately a little over a decade, we would have spent $1.2 billion on buying land, building roads, all the supporting stuff as well, so that traffic can come in and out and around Christchurch. Okay, that should set us up for a while, I would have thought. Okay. Meanwhile, if we look at the road safety stats, I pulled these off this morning. there, and they're not good. This is the last 5 and a bit years, since 2014. Okay, 80 deaths, about 14 a year, and a whole heap of serious injuries and minor injuries as well. Okay, motor vehicles, motorbikes take a fair chunk of the brunt of that. It's not surprising, there's a lot of them and they go fast. But you can see the pedestrian record not flash, the cycling record not flash. And I must say we haven't had a cyclist killed in the last 2 years here as well. I'd like to think the cycleways have had something to do with it. But they're big numbers, and we've got to be part of that solution. Alright, the government's just had their Vision Zero draft strategy go out. Okay, they want to be heading on that downward aim. How do we play our part? You're seeing other cities doing it. Auckland's pushing quite hard at the moment. They've just voted in Vision Zero as their key plank, and they're working out how to make it happen. They've got an even more ambitious goal than what the government's setting actually as well. We need to be thinking about what we want to do here. And there's all sorts of measures. Some of it is roading improvements, for example. Some of it's road user behaviour, education, enforcement and so forth. I think a big one though we've got to keep pushing hard with is speed. And this is something I've been hammering on probably for the best part of a decade, especially since what I've seen overseas. This was something I presented to Council a couple of years ago, hence the data is slightly out of date. But I was looking at where are the speed-related crashes. So all the white dots are the crashes, and all the red dots are the speed-related crashes. Okay, so you can see there's a lot of them in the mix there. And it works out in the urban areas as reported. Now this is just as the police report it, which is usually you look like you're being a bit reckless or you're clearly over the speed limit. About 10% urban and a much higher lot in the rural, and certainly a lot higher proportion of fatals, not surprisingly, as well. I would suggest too that these figures are underreported. One thing I noticed is when you look at these cycle and pedestrian crashes, for example, the percentages are even lower. So I think there's a systematic bias in how whether they pick up speed in those ones, for example. And speed plays an effect in the severity of every crash. Alright, so it may not play a role in the likelihood of every crash, the incidents that are happening, but it certainly determines often whether you're going to die or come out injured or not at all, hopefully. And there were some interesting ones. I looked and thought, hang on, we've got 100k zones where there's a whole raft of these speed-related crashes. Why are they still 100k's? This was a couple of years ago when I was suggesting a few ideas. We didn't have much. At the time I said, well, here's our 30k zones, or the ones that are about to happen, or 40k zones. It wasn't much. And we could add a whole lot more, and we could start with the low-hanging fruit. Okay, so we could look and say, well, hang on, what about all the commercial shopping areas? This is what Wellington's done very well in the last decade. They've looked at all their commercial shopping areas and said, you shouldn't be zooming through here, you probably aren't already anyway. Let's reinforce that by making a lower speed limit. Okay, so we're starting to do that. I know Riccarton's going to have a 30k speed limit soon. Papanui, I think they're just talking about the speed limit there, for example, as well. Okay, and then residential areas. We build these brand new subdivisions, or we go back and traffic calm some of them, and so they're all set up for lower speeds, and then we say, you can have a 50k limit. And that just seems a bit silly when we've got the potential to actually either start from brand new and say from day one you're going to be 30 or 40, or some of them say, you know what, you shouldn't be going any faster than this anyway, you're a local street and you look like a local street. Okay, so that was some of the ones I suggested at the time. I've been very pleased to see that we have been rolling out quite a lot. There's a couple out at the moment. Okay, put in your submissions out to the west and both out that way, I think, in the north. Yeah, and so some of the new subdivisions, in fact quite recent ones, for example out in Horswell and up there in Preston, they've gone back and said, you know what, this actually should be slower. So that's really good, we're starting to see that happen. And you need to build on it. You get the low-hanging fruit so that then you can show the success and you can say, see, that worked really well, so how about we do this one? Right? Bit more tricky perhaps, bit more of a trickier conversation, but you're starting to build up the evidence of people going, well, that wasn't the end of the world, it only took me an extra 30 seconds to drive through there, you know, things like that. The other thing is school zones as well. We haven't done a bad job. We were the pioneers of school zones, actually. But we've sort of got left behind a bit. Hamilton, I think, has just about got all their schools now under a school zone. Okay, and we're still sort of slowly doing about 3 a year or so forth like that. So we could work harder on that. At some point we've got to ask the question whether it should be 40 as well. And I know this debate's happening nationally about saying actually should they be 30k zones in a lot of places as well.
Is it 20 around a school bus?
It's still 20 around the school bus, yep, that too as well. Not that they often have a sign on the bus, that was suggested to make it easier for people to remember.
We need American style ones.
Yeah, big stop sign comes out, that's the one. Okay, this was something I did a while back when after we'd had the 30k zone in town here, and people of course been grumbling about that one for a while. I said, so what's it done to the crashes? And I thought, well, I need to compare with something. So I thought, well, all right, we've got the 30k zone, and then outside that in the 4 Avs, we've got the rest of the CBD. So I'll compare one against the other, see what's happened. This was the effect. So while the rest of the CBD had a little bit of a reduction, you can see in terms of injuries, we had about a 36% reduction in the 2 years before and after introducing the 30k zone there. Okay, and I had people that say, oh, well, is that because of the traffic? No one's driving there. So I went ahead and looked. No, traffic's actually gone up, if anything, over that same time. Okay, so it's not traffic related. This is the effect you get by just starting to slow the traffic down a bit. And I used that evidence actually when we had the Synassa 30k consultation last year and said, it works. This is why you're going to make 30k's on Synassa. In fact, Synassa Street was already timed for 30k down the green wave anyway, so you're not going to be going much slower anyway. Okay, but that's the key. You'll be able to do more of that over time. We'll be able to go back, look at the ones we've introduced and say, yep, we've got a really good safety benefit out of that. People might say, well, isn't technology going to save us? Self-driving cars and electric cars and all those things. There's a basic problem with geometry though. Okay, cars are still this big. Alright? So you're still stuck in traffic. Alright, you're still running people over, though the self-driving cars hopefully might improve that a little bit. So it doesn't matter what kind of fancy car it is, it still has a lot of those fundamental problems. Okay, it'll get some of the way. Electric will certainly help some of our climate change issues, for example. Self-driving might help some of our safety issues, but we've got to be looking seriously at some of the other modes. How do we get more people thinking actually bus, bike, walk, scoot, whatever, have to be in the mix there going forward as well. Okay, almost about the last thing I want to touch on the cars is parking. This is a bit of an issue as well. People say there's not enough parking, costs too much. To be honest, we actually need more paid parking. You just got to go to Auckland and Wellington to see that we get off lightly here. This is the zone where you actually pay parking in Christchurch. It's not that big actually. Okay. Sometimes I've gone to Isaac Theatre, for example, and I think, oh, that's cool, I can just park near Latimer Square, I'll get in the free bit and I can wander a couple of blocks. It's easy, it's not hard to do. And even the parking within, I can sort of, I'm down here, so I often sort of drive up the one-way street, hang a left into Litchfield Street, drive into the parking building, find a car park, boom, from there. And I think, well, that was easy. You know, people talk about free parking at malls, but to be honest, it's really hard sometimes to find a car park at a mall. So we need to look at that. Central City, do we broaden out what's paid areas? But to be fair, you've also got to look at those other high generators like malls, universities, things like that, and say, actually, you've got the same problems, and if we're going to have a level playing field, we need to also make sure that those ones also have charging as well. And you get the residents on board by saying, but we can guarantee you a spot if you get yourself a parking permit from there. And I know that my colleague Axel's had a bit of a discussion around some of the residents groups on that recently. The other thing is whether instead of parking here, you park somewhere out on the periphery and do a park and ride, hop on the bus that takes you in, or maybe a scooter that's right there strategically placed to take you in. But so there's lots of options there. We need to get serious about parking because we get off lightly in Christchurch despite what people say. Okay, last thing I sort of want to talk about is just sort of the impacts from the quakes and how that's still coming through. These colours aren't showing fantastically, but hopefully you can see there's a bit of a rainbow of this was the damage and the scale of the damage post-quake. So when Skirt did a bit of an assessment, obviously lots of red in the red zone, funnily enough, and not so flash in the eastern sides and the central city. And even, it's interesting how there was random pockets even in the rest of the city as well. I remember going up Gardeners Road and there was like about 3 houses that were just demolished. You know, it's a bit weird. But it showed where the real damage was. Clearly in the east and in the central city, all the brunt bit to the south there as well. All the houses around my place have all been replaced. And this shows in the traffic patterns. This was an interesting one a few months after the quakes there. All the red is where the traffic's increased. Out to the west, out there. The central city, of course, disappeared. You couldn't go in there, and out to the east all disappeared as well. We shifted, all right? We shifted where we lived, we shifted where we worked because we couldn't go to other places, right? We had to change our patterns. Fortunately, people had built, new subdivisions here, or you could find an industrial place somewhere to set up your shop or so forth, or work at home. It really dramatically changed our patterns, and it hasn't changed that much since. We've gone back into the central city, sure, but still there's definitely a push on the western side. And that's 10 years growth happened overnight. So what it means is that we have had to focus a bit on the areas where the most traffic is. But yeah, when people say fix the roads in the east, I sort of look at this data and go, well, we have been actually. This is just when Skirt was finishing up, they sort of totted up where had been the expenditure on, well, not just the roads, but what's under the roads. The first thing you had to do was fix all the pipes and everything like that. Well over half was in those eastern wards there, because as you saw, that's where most of the damage was. Okay. Some places like Rick and Wigram hardly spent anything there because there wasn't that much damage. Okay. So there has been a lot, but of course there needed to be, because as you saw, there was a lot, and it's still going to take a time to carry on through there. The challenge is that you'll tend to fix the busier roads first, because they'll get munted again sooner as well. Okay, and people will notice. So there is that bias over busier roads over quieter roads as well. I have this theory too, that actually with all that shaking, we've got a lot of cavities under the ground that haven't settled yet. Okay, and every time all those traffic go over and shake them a little bit more, another little one settles, another little one settles, and every now and then you get a bit lumpy, or you get a decent even pothole drop as well. I think that's going to happen for a couple of decades actually. So when people say, oh, how come they can't fix the roads properly, I don't think it's necessarily the road builder's fault. Okay, I think it's just the nature of the ground. We're going to have this problem for a while until things properly compact again, like they were pre-quake. Okay, and there is still more to come on the east side. Okay, they are still fixing more roads in the east and clearly in the centre and elsewhere. It's a never-ending challenge to work out which bit should go next, but it's not like the east is being ignored.
Outside our place
now. This is the last one I think that I've got, which I think is quite interesting and perhaps contentious in terms of that discussion with the central government. So I had a look at the National Land Transport Program for the next 3 years, Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, sort of these urban metro areas. This is what the government's putting in their share on state highway improvements, public transport, walking and cycling. Okay, and we've scaled it per capita, okay? So this is on a per population basis. Each person, you can see state highway improvements, we're actually where the most of the road building's happening. As you saw from that previous chart, perhaps not surprising. Auckland's about to get a bit of a push. I know they've got a big project coming, but that's what's happening the most at the moment. All right, public transport, we're not even on the radar. Okay, we city the same size as Wellington, and yet you can see the disparity in terms of the expenditure there. And this one's actually a bit surprising that for all the cycling push, we're actually the least per capita that we're spending at the moment. Partly because of a bit of a lull in terms of our projects and which ones got funded, but it's still interesting that the thing that supposedly we're so terrible at, Auckland and Wellington are spending more per capita than us over the next few years as well.
Is that just NZTA fund?
This is NZTA funding.
Council.
Yeah, so normally what you do is you double that to get your total spend all up. Your rates still would be similar if you like on that. But I think there's a couple of messages there that any incoming councillors, or maybe outgoing ones, could have a chat and say, hang on, this seems a little bit topsy-turvy here. This is why we're struggling in Canterbury or Greater Christchurch, because there seems to be this big focus on roads at the moment and not a lot happening in the PT and walking and cycling space.
The money's been taken by Auckland and Wellington.
Well, yeah, a bit potentially.
Well, that's per capita though, isn't it?
Yeah, this is per capita, yeah. And partly what you could say is that Auckland and Wellington have got their act together in terms of having the conversation about this is what we want. So the Auckland Transport Program, they had their thing a couple of years ago where they did that. We've just had Let's Get Welly Moving announced a couple of months ago. So they've had those conversations for a few years and said this is what we want, or do we want this, and da-da-da-da. We're still trying to figure that out, unfortunately, and that's the problem. Until we go to government and say, have we got a case for you, this may be the challenge. So I know PT's just started. We've started the business cases for PT investment here in Canterbury. It's going to take a while, but hopefully out of that we'll have a package we can say, right, give us some money, please. So yes, watch that with interest. All right, I'll leave it there because we're actually already hit 7 o'clock, but I can take a few questions before I have to go and have a pub quiz.
we're not going to have any questions. Because I think we normally stop at 7 unless people want us. No?
I want to make an observation.
All right. Margaret Austin wants to make an observation. That's unusual.
My car doesn't go at 30 kilometres an hour. It's just an invitation to be disobedient.
What stopped you before, Margaret?
Nothing. But the question that you haven't covered is traffic flow and the inadequacy of traffic light signals all over this town. It is hopeless. And that also is an invitation to be disobedient, which I had to be getting here tonight.
Whoa! Good on you, Margaret. I'd be disappointed if you were good, well behaved.
A few things I could suggest on that. One is the way we detect cars and traffic signals is we detect them at the stoplight, which is a real problem because you're standing there with your human eyes, you go, there's nothing coming, why can't I have the lights now? And the system's not smart enough to know. So it's the way we've inherited it, and it kind of works for some things, but certain situations you think, this is stupid, why couldn't they have changed the lights now? Because it's running blind basically, it's relying on when something goes over the top deck. The other challenge is if we give more green time to a certain movement, we have to take it from somewhere. So like we get a lot of talk about Christchurch, you don't have many green arrows, for example. Turn arrows. Someone comes from Auckland and go, we've got green arrows everywhere, you've got none. And okay, that's fine, but if we have a phase for a green arrow, we've got to take that time from someone else. Okay, and so you've got to sit there thinking, for a safety reason, it might be very good to do that. If it's for an efficiency reason, you might lose a bit, because now everyone else has lost a few more seconds that they previously had some green time, but now they're stuck in the red. So it's that endless trade-off of, if I make it easier for that route, I'm going to make it a bit harder for that route. There. But yeah, I mean, certainly they're not all clever. There's some I sit there and go, this could run a little bit different. This could be a bit faster there and a bit less there, you know. So the old traffic engineer brain gets on that.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. Tonight started off with a bit of a discussion about traffic engineers and what a terrible breed they are. I'd just like to start by paying tribute to an old mate of mine who was a traffic engineer from way back. Died a couple of weeks ago. His name was Peter Atkinson. And Gary might remember him.
I've fought with him for years.
Pete was he was also known as Prince Pete, but he was a traffic engineer with innovation. He worked with me at Monari and we came up with all sorts of ideas. He won some prizes and so on. So they're not all bad. And Pete was one of those guys who I think got it right some of the time. And if he didn't fight with you, Gary, it couldn't be much fight on him because everybody fought with you. I did as well.
I was with Peter when my summer job was at City Council actually 20 years ago. And yes, he won the Traffic Engineer of the Year award one time from there. One thing I missed about going from university to private practice was losing the opportunity to actually better train the next engineers coming through and say it's not just black and white and numbers and all the rest of it. And especially transport, there's a lot of grey, and as I used to introduce on day one, first lecture, I used to say it's about those pesky humans. They keep getting in the way. So I say, you know, engineering's mostly about materials, concrete and wood and water and things like that. I say, yeah, your material is this, people, and unpredictable, not consistent. They're a pain in the butt to work with, to be honest, but it makes it really interesting. Okay. And so I really enjoyed getting that through. I hope that my future successors do something similar.
So you might have already spoken about this, but the pedestrian lights, there's some of those pedestrian lights are forever on, you know, you can't drive through because there's nobody there. Can that be changed that when pedestrians walk up to the lights, that they can actually push it so that the lights can go green for them and red for traffic rather than
some of the modern ones now, they've got overhead sensors. If you look at some of the new ones, you'll see this sort of black thing up above, and it's actually a camera. Okay, and what it's trying to do for both cyclists and pedestrians is try to work out and go, there's a pedestrian there, there's a bike there, and so forth. And it's, yeah, I have to say the technology's not flash yet. I know I've sometimes gone up on a bike and said, you know, hello, I'm here, you know, hasn't got me. And I think it's the same problem in terms of pedestrians sometimes. It can get both false positives and false negatives, and so that can be a real challenge. Some of the ones, like I know Manchester Street, they've deliberately sort of set the default sometimes just say, we'll assume pedestrians are going to be here, and we'll give the pedestrians a bit of time first up. Let them start crossing safely before you turn around and run them over. But yeah, I know it's a frustration. The cycleways is a similar issue, that at the moment we've got a fun legislative thing that means that we can't just have turning traffic giving way to cyclists in a separated cycleway. It's not considered an intersection, so the give way rules don't apply. And so that's why you have to have the protected red arrow and then red cycle to make it happen. It's a pain, and my first job at ViaStrada was actually proposing the change to the rules on those, and we still haven't seen it happen yet, which will help ease some of those frustrations. Okay, yeah.
Hi Glenn.
Hey Brian, how are you?
How are you? Yeah, I was a traffic engineer and did signals and all the stuff in Dunedin and Timaru for about 35 years, and I came up here and I've spent the last 5 years in a concrete truck going all through every road with a traffic engineer's hat on, okay? And I'll say one thing, when I got here, the traffic light system was shit. This is the SCAT system and central control, and generally. Since then, it has improved out of sight. And I do 150 k's every day around the Christchurch, you know, or about 100. So I'll give them a bouquet for that. But I really, with your blue cycle numbers in the central city, I mean, the central city, to my view, is still a mess. They've screwed stuff up, and I don't come in here. But those blue numbers, could you put the numbers of cars beside it? Because what that says, there's a lot of cyclists, but your problem is big with the cars, you know, in comparison, you know, what is the percentage? And I think we can be ideologically against cars, but, you know, I can't see them going away in a hurry, you know.
I think the trick is you've got to make a policy call on which roads you say this is for cars and which ones you say cars are a guest. So, for example, around the promenade and all along the river now, we've got a shared space. 10Ks, you can drive there, and cars certainly do drive there, but what we said is it's not number one. You're there for walking and biking and so forth. Other roads, we've said that's the arterial, and so the aim is to get through like that. I think what's confused people a bit is we've changed the role of the one-way streets in the central city, and we probably haven't communicated very well the point. So people said, I used to use that to go across town. And now it's, well, that's not actually the point. The idea now is to use the 4 Avs to go right across town. The one-ways are meant to be to get into town from that. So that, and I haven't really heard a lot of council communication that's explained. We've changed our policies on those things, for example. So I think it's part of it. You've got to communicate clearly what you're trying to achieve with each of these things, and we don't always do a good job of that.
I think that's a really good point to finish on. I just love the fact that you were able to cover the whole thing and brilliantly in a way that even I could understand and not feel resentful at the end of it. I was just thinking, you're thinking about willfulness of the public. I remember one time when the Secretary of Transport was coming down here to have Christmas with his mother, and he said, I'd like to have a ride in your old car. So I took him out and roared all around the back roads and brought him back. I said, what did you think of it? And he said, just fantastic. I said, well, I really enjoyed it too. He said, oh, I'm pleased you did. Why is that? I said, because the car's not registered or warranted. I couldn't resist it. Look, one person I want to acknowledge is John Pete here, who worked with us. I met John when we were fighting the Northern Arterial, and it's great to. John did some magnificent work with us at community level from the university. So I'd just like to acknowledge that, John. But look, Glenn, this has been fantastic, and I've just been watching people and they've been hanging on every word. There's some graphs and numbers there that I think we need to print in the Tuesday Club notes, so I'll talk to you afterwards about getting some of those, because it's really important. I think, you know, for Mike Davidson here, standing for the council, people are beating up cycling at the moment, they're beating up the council, they're saying there's no money being spent in the east, and it's really interesting to see that data. So we need to actually publicise. It's really, I just leaned over and said to Margaret Austin, really, really good use of data tonight. So I'd like you to put your hands together and thank you.